Do you smile?
Welcome back. Welcome back, everybody. The TCA's Free Pathway to Sustainability webinar series is intended to keep TCA members informed while introducing a conduit for communication and collaboration as we move towards net zero. As we celebrate Earth Week, today's distinguished panel members will be sharing their experiences associated with achieving ultra-low energy buildings by applying passive house building principles. Low energy buildings are slowly emerging in our skyline. Most notable is Vancouver's Curve, which has been identified as the tallest passive house in the world. With only an hour available to cover a vast extent of material, our panelists will try their best to address questions added to the Q&A box at the end of the session, with any unanswered questions addressed following the webinar. I'm honored to introduce our esteemed panelists who are on the forefront of passive house design in their respective industries. We have Andrew Peel, who's the founder of Peel Passive House Consulting. He's a renowned expert in the field of passive house buildings, specializing in the design and construction of high-performance, low-energy buildings. He's an accredited passive house certifier, consultant, and trainer. We also have Chris Ballard, who's the Passive House Canada CEO. He's been Ontario's Minister of the Environment and Climate Change, the Minister of Housing, a member of Ontario's Treasury Board, and a municipal councillor. Also, we have Sheena Sharp, who is the principal at Coolearth Architecture. Sheena is the licensed architect and fellow of the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada. Coolearth specializes in low carbon design and has certified several buildings. Sheena will be the Green Party candidate for Don Valley West in the next federal election. Passive building is a set of design principles for attaining a rigorous level of energy efficiency while also creating a comfortable indoor environment. Andrew, we'd like to start with you, and could you address what the key elements are for passive house? I understand a building designed to a passive house standard could use 90% less energy than one built to conventional codes, with the most significant savings associated with space heating. Tell our members about the key elements of passive house construction and how significant savings can be achieved.
Great, thanks, Sandra. Yeah, I mean, one of the things I love about Passive House is it's pretty simple and basic to understand. I mean, I think you can explain it to a kid in grade 2, and they get it. There's even books, that describe Passive House to young kids. Yeah, essentially, there's 5 basic principles to a passive house. There is, continuous excellent levels of insulation. There is, I mentioned continuous, so we're actually eliminating thermal bridges. So essentially weaknesses in the insulation that we're trying to wrap around the entire building. We want to build an airtight envelope, so minimize as much as possible the unwanted air leakages in and out of the building. We want to include high performance windows. So this is typically, especially in Toronto or pretty much most of southern Canada, this would be triple pane windows, thermally broken frames, high performance glazing. And then we also have mechanical ventilation with heat recovery. So since we're making the building very airtight, we want to make sure we actually get a good air exchange, but we don't want to do that with a lot of energy, and that we can achieve through mechanical ventilation with heat recovery. And so all of this, to answer the question about the energy, all of this really helps drive down our heating and cooling demands and loads, which is the big major contributor to the energy savings we see in a passive house.
Wonderful. How about the benefits of passive house construction? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, there's tons of benefits. And usually, I mean, it's almost like picking which ones are most relevant for the audience, for whoever you're speaking to. Um, but naturally, for we're have a climate change lens. These buildings are very effective at driving down carbon emissions. We see a myriad of benefits to the occupants. So while passive house actually achieves great energy savings, which is naturally a benefit, and subsequent reduction in energy bills. Um, we see it's a very occupant-centric standard, and so there's benefits in terms of health benefits to the occupants, great indoor air quality, thermal comfort. You can sit by a window and basically put your face against the window on the coldest day and still feel comfortable. They're very quiet. They actually block out a lot of noise from the outside. So if you live next to a train station, you're not going to hear much of that. Um, and we get great comments on low amounts of dust. So if you're concerned about allergy or other dust related things, it really helps. And the passive house is really designed for the long term, designed and built for the long term. So these buildings are highly durable. They're resilient. So if the power goes out, you'll see they'll maintain temperature for quite some time. So yeah, they're very good from a life cycle perspective for if you have a long-term view of a building.
Excellent. Tell us about some of your passive house projects. Do they include more than just homes?
Yes, I mean we work on, from single family homes up to tall residential towers, but also a variety of non-residential buildings. So we worked on a production facility in Ontario. We actually worked on the first passive certified car dealership in the world. um, Community centers. We're working on an eco-industrial building as part of an eco park out east. All sorts of build. I mean, probably heavy industry is maybe the only type of building that where passive house hasn't really been applied. So the world's your oyster with passive house and buildings.
Okay, Sheena. Whoops, sorry. There we go. As we're aware, a number of lofty objectives with respect to net zero carbon and housing starts are being identified. If not absolute, as a minimum, what passive house principles should be considered when designing ultra-low energy buildings to address these lofty objectives?
I mean, all of them. And I know that, people have sort of tempest in a teapot arguments about whether this is better or that is better. But in the end, if you're looking at, say, CAGBC's zero net carbon standard or the passive house standard, you have to do the same things in order to hit those objectives practically, right? So along with electrification. But so it's all the same. It's the same sets of skills that you use both at designing or building to apply to all of these. The only thing I would put on tiny homes is that passive house it's really, really hard to hit passive house on very small buildings because the envelope to floor ratio is so large. But that doesn't mean that you don't apply the same principles because you want the same things. You want comfort, you want resilience, and you will get all that. You just might not hit the actual number, the passive house number.
And in getting the passive house number, what is the difference? Are there incentives for that? Or is it just you've made an agreement for funding that if you reach an objective?
It's really integrity. So in the end, chasing funding is one thing. And yes, absolutely, passive house principles, these tend to be on larger buildings. Passive house principles, when applied, will contribute a lot to energy reduction metrics in the CMHC world, for example. But I think one of the things we have to focus on as practitioners, builders and designers is you can actually see the results. I mean, we did the Ontario Association of Architects building to net zero, and their energy bill for January was $63.32 or something. It's a 20,000 square foot office building with what some would argue way too many windows. But so it's great. Come and see it. But so I guess where I'm going with this is one of the big things that I see for Passive House or some of the other standards is the integrity. You know, you're going for an actual metric. You can't fool yourself, right? You're going to be air tested. You can't fool yourself. And that's what gives us the kinds of results to owners like a $62 bill in January for a 20,000 square foot office building, right?
Yeah. Chris, since your time with Passive House Canada, have you come across any data supporting the premium cost associated with Passive House design and construction and/or actual savings?
Yeah. Well, we all know that COVID has, since COVID, supply chain issues, etc., the price of building building anything to any standard has gone up astronomically. And I think in the Passive House world, when we're talking to the financial analysts who track this stuff and present numbers, we're looking at a Passive House that delta between code built to Passive House is anywhere from 2 to 5% more. You know, due to the airtight construction, all of those attributes that Sheena and Andrew have been talking about. If you've never built to, and this is my caveat, if you've never built to the Passive House standard, if you don't have you know, a few trained people on staff to help guide the project as the builder, it's going to be more. And if it's your first project, it's most likely going to be more than that because of the learning curve. But once you get through your first building and really understand what it is we're after, we're looking at those costs because of the, you know, the additional costs. Passive House windows cost more, but you know, some of those costs are offset by not meeting you know, significant boiler systems or even a furnace in a single family building. May not offset them all, but they do offset some of the costs. So 2 to 5% is what we're being told right now, and we're hoping that as well, hoping, I actually believe, and we can see it happening slowly, that as more and more components manufacturers come into the marketplace in Canada, North America, we see more certified components from existing manufacturers, windows, HVAC equipment, that those prices will become more compatible with regular non-Passive House certified products. So yeah, 5 to 10% to begin with. If you've never done a Passive House, if you have no staff that have training in Passive House, it can be considerably more than that. So we always encourage people to get some of their key staff trained up, to, you know, look for an architectural firm or you know, who have done this before, and engineers who have done this before, because they'll help guide you.
So I might jump in because I want to share an experience we had with a team. This is a few years ago now, but wanted to give a shout out to Indwell. They're a nonprofit affordable housing provider in Hamilton, and we work with their team, you know, the design construction team, us being the only Passive House consultants or a team member with Passive House experience. And you know, they went, as Chris suggested, they went through the training. They had the right attitude, which is, in our experience, the most important ingredient. And their first project was actually a Passive House retrofit. They managed to achieve, and this has actually been, there's a report on it. I think it's from CMHC, at 4% above conventional. And this is several years ago now, when we had fewer components and experience in general. So you know, it can be more expensive, but done right, passive house can be definitely affordable.
Actually, it's wonderful to hear that.
Yeah, I guess the add-on to that too is that if you're building to own, the operating costs are drastically reduced, and it's why we find that one of the largest uptakes comes from social housing providers right across Canada, and residential tower developers who are building a rental tower, and they're going to own it. They plan on owning it as part of their portfolio for the next 50, 60 years. And when they look at the total cost of building ownership, they really see how it really makes sense to go to passive house, and that small premium they may pay up front, it's more than paid back, you know, in the first few years.
Sorry, I want to, this is great. We can build off each other because we actually have a long-term client in the UK. They did their first multifamily passive house in 2009. And so they have, you know, is it almost 15 years of experience now building and operating passive house. And they found it is more financially beneficial to do a passive house than not. They are the building owner, right? Because not only have reduced operating costs, but they have lower rent arrears and lower turnover because people don't want to leave the buildings, because once you're in a passive house, you don't want to live anywhere else.
Yeah, or work anywhere else too. I mean, we could continue on with anecdotal evidence, but it's not a certified passive house building, but Manitoba's Manitoba Hydro's head office in Winnipeg, which is you know, nears passive house standards and exceeds some in other areas, and has some interesting technical solutions. What they found was employee absenteeism plummeted because of really good quality indoor air, and it's a nice place to work, and it's comfortable, and et cetera, et cetera. And one of their senior officials told me that the cost to go to this high performance building has been more than offset by reduced employee absenteeism. So when you talk to commercial space owners, you know, this is what they're saying about passive house. It can command a premium in places where tenants understand the benefit of working in a passive house environment.
Can I add something to this? Some of the other attributes are almost as important, like to social housing providers. Resilience is really important. The ability for a building, City of Toronto is now looking for people to design buildings, and passive house is the perfect vehicle to guide you, that will not lose their temperature for 3 days. And so what does that mean? That means that if there is some sort of disaster or big weather event, which we know more are coming, you don't have to try to figure out how to move all the seniors into a gym and find cots and everything else. You just leave them where they are, and the building itself will still be habitable, and you know, provide a generator for a refrigerator for meds and things like that. But so there are other benefits that are at least as valuable to some owners as the cost savings.
So that leads into the minimizing the cost. What is being done or can be done to minimize the cost impact for housing? Yeah,
I would say two things, and I know Sheena and Andrew have far more experience, the hands-on design and implementation. But from where I sit there, you know, and what I hear from our members across the country, there's two things that need to be done. The first is education and training. Make sure you've got. I mean, not everybody on your team has to be fully certified to passive house, but you know, site supervisors, verifiers. You do need to have a few people who know about passive house and know what to look for when they're building. But a big part of it, and I know it's outside of the hands of contractors, of builders, unfortunately, but the integrated design process where all the players in this building get together as soon as possible, the client, the architect, the engineering firm, the contractor if possible, or a contractor who can provide that type of real hands-on experience. That integrated design process where you thrash about and hammer out a bunch of the issues, identify the issues with design, with engineering, with client expectations. And then you have the contractors there are saying, are you guys, what are you guys smoking? This can't be done like this. You keep going around and hammering those issues out, sorting those issues out so that when the shovel finally goes in the ground, the results happen much faster, that the building is built with fewer change orders and people are happier. It's a difficult process. The integrated design process can be very difficult for people who've not done it before. But once you've done it, a lot of folks say there's no going back. So those are the two things, the training and where possible, integrated design process. And I'm sure my colleagues on the panel can add some more things as well.
Talking about the training, tell us more about the actual programs and incentives that are available for those that do want to build. And also, you mentioned the training. If you were bringing a contractor and a site super in, what are you focusing on in that training? What is it that you want to teach them that's so important?
Well, there's generally two types of training. There's the training for the designers, the architects, the engineers. It's many hours of work. It involves learning how to do energy modeling, writing an exam for globally recognized initials after your name, the certified passive house designer or consultant. But we also do a lot of training of tradespeople, the people who are actually putting this building together. And they need to know, and that training is like 3 days. Passive House Canada offers that training. It's 3 days, hands-on, a little bit of theory, but then it's okay, let's get at it. Here's how you install a passive house window. Here's a variety of different wall assemblies and what they may look at, what they may look like, and what does a passive house wall assembly, what do they all have in common? And we spent a lot of time on the finishing details. How do you tape? How do you finish this building properly? And it's different than current standards, but we find that tradespeople pick it up very quickly. This is my favorite saying is it's not rocket science. It may be building science, but it's not rocket science. So we find tradespeople really enjoy a little hands-on training. And then you want, the site supervisor, someone who's sort of the foreman level who can make sure that the trades are doing things the passive house way, whether it be taping or other finishing details. So but that training is just a few days of training, again, around passive house principles and whatnot. There are contractors who have, they jokingly refer to them as the air boss, to make sure the ceiling is being done properly, that no one is drilling a hole through the wall, the exterior wall, where they shouldn't be, or if they accidentally do, they report it so it can be fixed. Just a lot more attention to detail. And again, we find that tradespeople love it because they just feel it's up to their game. And I've attended trades training where the framers say to me afterwards that they'll never be able to go back and work the way they used to work once they have seen the passive house way. So even if they're not working on a passive house, they're paying more attention to detail, and that's never a bad thing.
And the government, what is the government doing? Do they have programs
Well,
available for
Oh,
training?
yeah. I mean, starting with the federal government, and I was pleased to see in this last federal election continued support for, we'll call it green education or green trades funding. So upping the skill levels of people who work in the green trades. Upping the skill level of people who are tradespeople who are building buildings who need to know how to do things faster. A lot of that federal money flows to provincial programs like the one here in Ontario. And we're always happy to put people seeking government funding in touch with the appropriate forms and folks, but it's a fairly straightforward process. And it was really nice to see the federal government. They haven't released all of the fine print about this round of financing, so I don't know too many details, but they have assured me that financing for green trades training and designer consultant training is still going to continue, and a lot of our folks take advantage of that. They can reduce their cost 60 to 80%. In other words, the government was picking up that amount of the cost. I'm going to assume that level is going to continue. Knock on wood, it will at that level. But even if it's not, we're not talking about an awful large amount of money when you look at the total cost of the project.
And once you learn it for life. So,
well, you do, but we need to make sure that you stay up on new technology, new ways of doing things, and that really importantly, you share what you learn with other people. And I mean, with Andrew, with Sheena, they know that this is the strength of the Passive House community, that we like our social get-togethers in Toronto where we present projects and we talk about what didn't go according to plan or what the special challenges were that we had to overcome. And it really is nice to see a community that supports each other.
and what are those social events?
Well, the Passive House Canada, together with a Toronto group of Passive House aficionados, we call them Pulse events. We have one, I believe, the information's on our website at passivehousecanada.com. I believe our next one is a tour of Harmony Commons, which is the U of T's new residents out in Scarborough. Which is a Passive House student residence for about 750 people. And the kitchen is totally electric. The only gas on site runs a generator in case power goes out. I would check.
Sorry, Chris, didn't mean to interrupt.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say there is another Passive House event. It's not affiliated with Passive House Canada, but tomorrow evening at Toronto Metropolitan University, there's an event called Boots on the Ground, which is often, and particularly tomorrow, we'll have Passive House focused presentations as well.
Excellent. So, having seen a number of Passive House inspired buildings, tell us about your experiences, good and bad.
Well, I think that I'll jump in. I think we've sort of touched on what can go wrong if you don't have the training, if you've never done it before. It can be very frustrating and too expensive to give it to do it without some training. So we encourage people to get trained up and to work with people who know what they're doing, who've done it before. And then after you do your first, your second project, you're off and running, quite frankly. And the contractors that I've talked to, that we've dealt with, they basically say, give us the plans, just tell us what to do, we'll go do it. It's not rocket science. And I'm pleased to see how that's worked in past as well.
In my experience, the things that go bad are contractors, as I think it was Andrew who said attitude is the most important thing. And
Yeah,
we have a contractor who comes in and says, oh, yeah, whatever, and just starts building things the way they would always build things, notwithstanding the contracts or the drawings or the requirement for someone to be in charge of the air barrier, and understanding all of that. We end up fighting it throughout the whole process. And you know that an air tightness test is a deficiency review, okay? So when you go through, we can tell where all the leaks are, and we can tell where things weren't built properly. And, you know, build it once right, and things are smooth sailing. You know, say, oh, they don't really know, I'm going to do it this way instead. And you just end up with, we're not meeting the client's objectives. We all look bad, and we will get caught out. So those are the kinds of projects that I don't like working on.
I will offer an antidote to bad attitude, which I won't say works 100% of the time, but what we find is when people understand why they're doing things differently, you don't just tell them you have to do this differently now from the way you've been doing it for 20 years. This is why, and whether that's, you know, just a conversation, or whether, you know, there's even site-based training where for half a day or a day, you know, experienced trainer might go in and work with the team, or you know, the people now actually building it, right? The carpenters, the mechanical contractors, and say, okay, here's passive house, the very basics of what they need to know, and here's how we're going to do it. And we'll work with mock-ups. And you see the light bulbs go up when they start to understand why they have to do things. And we've literally taken folks who are like, you know, somebody who's like the most ardent against doing something different, and, you know, what's this passive house? And once they went through that process, they became the biggest champion on site for doing things differently.
yeah, it does that training, as Andrew says, really, we find really instills a sense of pride. And we hear time and again when, you know, a building is shut down for a blower door test, a pressurization test. You know, the trades don't come in that day or that half day or whatever, but many of them show up because they want to see how their work stands up, you know, and it's almost a festive opportunity with lots of applause when they see the results and the lack of leaks. It builds camaraderie and a sense of doing things better.
So how does an owner make decisions regarding the various options and premiums associated with these principles? So you've got a budget and you want to make a trade-off.
Right. Well, that's where Sheena comes into the fore.
Yeah.
I think that you have to understand buildings. Obviously, people have lots of objectives. So we've worked on passive house buildings, single family homes. We've worked on passive house principles in like childcare, towers. Owners have much wider objectives than just energy, although people come to us because they want really low energy. But the thing about passive houses, you're investing in the walls, which will be there for the life of the building, and you don't want to change them for 50 years. So, you know, in the grand scheme of things, when we're costing things, if the capital costs are going too high, like we can put in a cheaper kitchen and you can put in the kitchen of your dreams in 10 years, right? Which is a significant number sometimes. So, so in the whole life of the building, in all of the objectives that an owner wants, comfort, lack of drafts, something that they won't have to touch. Well, yes, you have to do some maintenance, but essentially the walls are going to be there for 50 years. So put your money there. And some of the other, like even mechanical systems, you know, we had one super low budget project. It's a hospice. So I don't know if you guys realize it, but hospices in Ontario run by bake sales. Okay. It's really hard to fund a hospice. And so they put all their money into the envelope. You know, they have 14-inch thick walls, and they put in a really inexpensive gas mechanical system, because that will last 15 years. And in 15 years, they will probably have enough money to change that out, right? So though that is a client with some really, really hard choices. But as we were building it, it was really interesting. We barely needed any winter heat. As the temperature started to rise, the building was cool and comfortable to work in, right? And so you can start immediately as you're building the building, as soon as you have the envelope enclosed, you can start to see how it's going to perform long-term. So those are some of the ways that if necessary, when we come to a point, because capital cost is capital cost. Like, you can tell people, oh, you're going to save all this money. And they say, yeah, but this is all the money I have right now. I need to get through this needle, and then I can like think about other things. So that's how we do it. We sort of triage different things. And honestly, the value of a good envelope system will serve you for a long time, and you only do it once. So it tends to be high up on the list.
I know, I think, I mean, this isn't directly cost, but I think it helps build the case for, you know, building a passive house is where you can take a client or to an existing passive house. Whether that's a home, whether that's another, you know, non-residential building, something that might be similar or not. But just stepping into a passive house, especially if it's like midwinter or midsummer, and experiencing the difference, indoor air quality, thermal comfort, that's very helpful for reinforcing the value of the investment they may be making in passive house.
So the design impact, how do the design, or sorry, how does the passive house design principles impact the designer and their decision-making process?
I think that the design process is kind of like a spiral. You know, it's circular. You visit all requirements and you come back and you revisit them. And so traditionally we go through like a schematic design, which is the basic shape of the building. Then we integrate mechanical systems, and then we document. Those are like the three stages. And when you're doing really low energy buildings, where the difference between hitting passive house, for example, and not hitting it, you know, 15 kilowatt hours per meter square as opposed to 17, it's kind of important. And there are some aspects at each stage of the building that matter. So we do energy modeling right at the beginning, and this applies to, excuse me, houses, and it applies to towers. So once we've got a schematic design, at the same time as we're doing costing, we're doing energy modeling. And so you come to a point where you give a package to the owner that says, okay, we're meeting all of your objectives. Doing energy modeling up front is not part of the process that we have, that my industry has followed for the past like eons. So that is something that's new. And as you proceed through the stages, you are looking at different equipment, which means like engineers are looking at the trade-offs for you know, distributed versus central systems, and the costs, which are always changing. And so paying attention to that becomes important, but a lot of the mechanical systems integrate in the same way. So that's not as big a deal for us. But at the same time, at the end of every stage, we do a more detailed energy model just to make sure we're still on track. And the way we do it is we try to hit 20% below the target, so that we have some contingency, because what you find is that your hands get tied. So if you're taking something through site plan approval, like a tower, your outside wall gets set and your inside wall gets set by sales, and your window to wall ratio gets set, and your client has just spent like $300,000 on that. So you're not like changing the windows. So you have to make sure it's right before you go through that expensive process. So just if it's kind of weird, but if you want, or unexpected for some people, but if you want to bring this thing home, you have to think about the interactions of everything, the interactions of approvals, the interactions of you know, budgeting, energy and cost. So that's probably the biggest thing. And we do that for our smallest projects and our largest projects.
And I understand the City of Toronto's coming up with some new requirements for energy reporting. I would imagine having done your studies up front is going to be very useful.
Well,
go ahead.
Kind of, Sandra, but like what we're doing is like investment in a building is probably the biggest thing an owner invests in, right? It's a huge amount of money. And so what we're doing is trying to predict performance. Once you get to performance, you get told whether or not you hit it every month because you get a bill from your utility, right? And so the City of Toronto is looking at declarations of how your building is performing. And that is actually, I don't think the modeling actually helps that. Sometimes it helps it when, if your building is not performing the way it's predicted, you can use the final energy model to, if you sub-meter different pieces of equipment or panels, you can use the final energy model and match it and see which one doesn't match. And you can sometimes use it as a problem-solving tool. But mostly, you know, it's going to be pretty easy to tell whether or not we failed or passed because it's all in the energy bill.
Well, you can, so it's kind of maybe related to, you know, energy performance declaration. But if you're looking at, so if there is a shortfall or you know you have a poor performing building, I mean, energy modeling can be helpful to understand how to optimize. Okay, how are we going to improve this? Where can we have the biggest impact? And how do we come up with a plan? Because often enough that might be in a stepwise fashion of, okay, well, I don't have the money to do everything today, but how do I make a sensible program of retrofits that'll get me to a much better performance or a particular target in the future?
So other than the training that we've talked about and the importance of having site supers and carpenters in training sessions to appreciate the importance of creating this airtight envelope and all the things that can go wrong and penetrate through that envelope, how do these principles impact the contractors and or material suppliers?
I think, as you say, the impact is in training. There are some materials that are different but install the same, and I'm particularly thinking about smart air barriers. So, so you installing something that it feels very similar. But the properties of those air barriers, like two-way vapor flow and things like that, are somewhat different. And so you sometimes, at least currently, have to get them from, there's a reduced number of suppliers that you can purchase them from, for example. So, and some contractors are very tempted to switch out other materials that don't actually work as well. That's, you know, why the first ones were chosen. The biggest thing is air testing. And I mean, we test every piece of concrete that comes on site, right? And the building code says we have to have a certain amount of air tightness in our envelope. We just rarely test it, except for windows, traditionally in Toronto construction. So you're going to be testing the air tightness, and this is going to have to be integrated into the construction schedule. And it's particularly impactful on a big building. And so you start to just isolate certain parts of the building and test them as you go through, because we all kind of know one trade will follow another, and in a big building, you'll have multiple trades who have followed each other up the building, right? So, so at what point do you test? You want to test preferably at a point before the drywall goes on, so you can find any leaks and you don't have to take things apart later if something is leaking really badly. But as we all know, we're all trying to hit a deadline, and so that can be a challenge for the site, the general contractor, to try to manage that. And I think that is probably the biggest difference. But I think it also probably, like, being held to a standard is a recognition of your work, right? So it's important, and I think that it helps us all, and when we achieve it, we can be proud of doing that.
I'll add that actually we've seen particular challenges with ductwork for mechanical systems, particularly like really ventilation systems. I mean, we're designing the system so that we deliver certain quantities of air and remove certain quantities of air from each space in the building. But what we found a common occurrence is that we're not actually able to achieve those flow rates in the different parts of the building, or not maybe all of them, because we have quite leaky ductwork. And we might get assurances from certain contractors. Oh yeah, my work is very tight. But just like the blower door test for the whole building, we've essentially blower door test, or airtight air leakage test the ducts, and often find they're not up to scratch. And so there needs to be some remediation work. And unfortunately, we've had some projects where everything is drywalled in and we can't access the ducts. And some people might be familiar with technologies like AeroSeal, that you can go in and blow stuff into the ducts. Well, you can't necessarily do that even as a remediation method on buildings that have all the fire dampers installed, and they can't be installed while you're doing that test. So you're left with a system that's not performing, and trying to figure out, well, how do we get it to perform? So there's definitely some improvements that need to be made on this front, even with passive house projects. And this is stuff we're actively working on, such as doing testing before your drywall goes in, do some pre-commissioning just to see, are you getting the actual flow rates in the spaces before you do the final commissioning. So yeah, this will certainly impact contractors and workflow and so on. And then maybe I'll speak to material suppliers. I mean, as passive house grows,
And just read off
sorry,
your
do you wanna-
last point, in that another impact is hydronic systems. And subcontractors follow each other, and the next guy in has to deal with what the last guy did and work around it. And we have had situations where we weren't getting the pressure differential that we needed in a hydronic system, because essentially the piping had been installed to go around things, and it was causing a lot more friction in the system. And at that point, like, we were able to rework some things. Some of this was in a mechanical room where it was all open, but it's not where before we would just say, oh, run the pump at a higher speed, or, oh, let's get a bigger pump. But all of that will cost you energy, right? So suddenly we're working towards an energy balance that says you have to use this much energy. So solving problems with things not functioning by just like blowing harder or pumping harder is not going to actually solve the problem in this case.
And I'll pick up on from material suppliers as passive house grows across the country. We start to see more suppliers want to understand, well, okay, do my products actually meet passive house requirements? And so we've been working more and more with these suppliers. Say, okay, well, let's verify your products for passive house compliance. At least get the data. We can demonstrate or verify the data you have. Or hey, if you want to actually get your components certified, we can help you through that process as well. Because yeah, I mean, I think Chris mentioned earlier about getting more and more local products. I mean, we've that number has been growing, and we want to continue to grow that. So for the contractors and designers and whoever else on the call, where you might have suppliers you're working with that you'd like to see, are they suitable for Passos? I mean, encourage you to have them go through that process.
And I guess that somewhat leads into our next question, Andrew, about who is driving the market when it comes to making passive house decisions. You're building a house. What type of heating system do you want? Do you want a heat pump in your house, or do you want to, as Sheena has mentioned, design saying, let's get the envelope right first, and we know 10 years we'll exchange that, and we can save money by putting something and changing it later? Or how does the geothermal system, the economics of the geothermal system, fit into this?
Yeah, I think there's, I mean, yeah, definitely a variety of drivers. I mean, from the clients themselves. So whether they're municipalities saying, hey, for our public buildings, this next RFP, we want passive house. Or you have jurisdictions like the city of Vancouver who have, passive house embedded into their building code. You have particularly affordable housing. That's a big driver for passive house. You've actually got numerous affordable housing developers that are actually innovative. They don't mind taking on something new because passive house, what it delivers, aligns with their goals, what they want from their building. And I mean, certainly incentives play a role. So if you have incentives out there for heat pumps, well, that's going to be help make a decision in favor of heat pumps for your mechanical systems. Right. And then it's, sometimes just individual wishes. And, Sheena has spoken to some of those as well, of like, okay, what's important for a particular client? And how do we align what Passos delivers to what's important? If indoor air quality, maybe your kids have asthma, you want a very clean environment. Well, that's going to be a driver for indoor air quality. Well, hey, passive house can help deliver that.
Mhm. So if
Yeah.
I can make a quick if I can make a quick comment, for me, it's not necessarily the who is driving the market, but the what is driving the market. And I would say from a very high level, the what's are the need to build climate resilient buildings that are ultra low energy efficient. So the rising cost of fossil fuels, especially, and that doesn't include the price on carbon that governments may impose. It's just simply the price of fossil fuels are going up. They're out of the control of Canadians. They're set on international markets, and we know they're only going to go up and up and up and up faster, most likely than electrical costs. So it's the price of fossil fuels, providing buildings that are climate resilient. And the other driver, of course, is that climate resiliency, that ability to meet government regulations, building regulations, municipal, provincial, and maybe one day federal, that are driving buildings to keep people safe in the face of climate change, where they live, where they work, where they go to school, where they enjoy recreation, or at the hospital. As governments ramp those rules up, those standards up to keep people safe, that's a big driver. But the other one, sort of even it doesn't require government intervention, is the rising cost of fossil fuels. People want corporations want alternatives.
So we see a lot of developers choosing floor to ceiling windows in their condos, or we see balconies continuing to be constructed with thermal bridging. How is that, what is driving those type of decisions?
I think residential window wall is driven by cost. I mean, people,
Yes.
it's cheap, because if you can have one system that spans floor to ceiling, It's way cheaper than having one system that spans and then, well, not way cheaper, but then punching out windows, for example, especially if you're punching out larger windows. And I mean, walls are a structural system, right? They take wind load and so they have to be securely fastened to the floors. And so that's really where the benefits of residential window wall came in and why we've been building like that for, I don't know, at least 30 years, a bit more than that probably, but they leak. Like the Architects Insurance Company has put out a directive 20 years ago that said, you're not going to be insured for using this stuff. And so we get our clients who say, we want to use it anyway, we won't sue you. Okay, fine. But still, we're putting in a piece of technology that is non-performing. Like a curtain wall is very performing, but a curtain wall is a much different system and it's a lot more expensive. Residential window wall, where the wall sits on a slab and spans to the floor above, that is totally that's totally driven by cost.
Well, and I'll add, because we were engaging with a large tower developer last year, and they were even considering, okay, well, it might cost a bit more to upgrade our approach, but they didn't want to move away from window wall because of the change in the construction process. They saw that as the biggest risk, is if I have to change, how I build, that's too much for us, right? So they were actually willing to spend a bit more money on better components, but that we couldn't get them across the line in terms of change of construction process. Whereas, like I said, with affordable housing providers, they've been willing to, move in a different direction,
But
how it's built.
You've
Yeah.
got
Well,
people like Ken who are showing up with a panelized wall system that is based on curtain wall technology and also insulated metal panels, which are like ubiquitous in the industrial world, right? We've been making them forever. So they're putting things together in a different way, and they will guarantee passive house airtightness. Now it's expensive, okay? It's more expensive, and I know we're kind of in infancy, so we have to optimize things, but we are trying to offset those costs with speed. Because if we can do an entire envelope for a large tower in like 6 to 8 weeks, that changes, and we do it with a crane, right? That changes the construction scheduling, and you're closed in sooner, and you can start to do other work sooner. But so there are alternatives out there. And I think we're in the experimentation stage, like, the curse sort of, it's like, may you live in an experimentation phase. But there are people who are trying to chip away at that problem.
And I think it's important in that problem for the owners. These are the developers that are building condo units and selling them. They have no invested interest, but the owners, when they're going in to look at different condos, being aware that there is a difference. Ask about the window wall, find out about the building you're looking at buying into, because there will be more and more that are being constructed to a higher level and having an appreciation.
Yeah, I think, Sandra, though, the developer we were speaking to last year, they've traditionally done condos, but they're moving into purpose-built rentals as well. So which they would have the longer term perspective, and even that,
Good point.
the changing the way they build was not palatable to them at this stage.
The irony, and it's nothing to do with passive house, but the irony of many of those buildings, condominiums I visited with the floor to ceiling window walls, is that in the showroom on the first floor, it looked beautiful and people bought their unit based on that showroom. But then when given the keys a couple of years later and they walk into their 10, 20, 30 story unit, and it's floor to ceiling walls, vertigo sets in. And I can't tell you the number of times I've seen people that when I come back to the unit, the walls are have couches pushed up against them, furniture pushed up against them because they don't want to be able to look straight down. They find it, too many people find it uncomfortable. So, what's that got to do with Passive House? Nothing other than I think if you didn't have those systems, you'd have more usable floor space or wall space, perhaps.
I see we're quickly running out of time here, but I just wonder, do you have any comments on the wartime housing program that's currently being discussed and how passive building principles may be, how we can get them incorporated into these designs?
I can comment a bit on that. I think it won't save it. Planning is really our bottleneck, not the building departments. Somewhat, some building departments, but mostly the building departments are doing fine. I think of this as, but we always have sites that are different sizes, particularly if we're trying to build in cities to higher densities. So we need plans that can be adjusted to meet the particular site. But on the other hand, I think that panelization, so my guess, and please give another perspective, but I put my money on panelization, and like at my firm, we think like there are 4 walls that will fit it, and we use the walls that the contractor feels whichever one the contractor feels more comfortable with, right? But there are like 200 ways of putting together walls that will not do it. So if at a minimum, we could identify the connection details, 4 options of walls, all of which will hit. I'm thinking like a double stud wall or a single stud wall with outriggers, or when you get into the non-combustible, you have a few less choices. But I think that could really help. I mean, to say use these details, and prefabricators show up with those details, all the better.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think that's something we're missing in the Passive community and more broadly as well is repeatable construction details. And that'll just help adoption and scaling in many ways.
Agreed. We've talked about the benefits, but the last question that I have here, do you have anything you'd like to add regarding the movement towards building electrification? I know that the Toronto Planning is currently put something out for a double electricity demand by 2050. So they're developing a plan to address the future needs.
Right.
I'd like
Well,
to.
as we move to electrify everything, the biggest concern is do we have enough capacity to make the electricity? Do we have the transmission capacity, and do we have the distribution capacity if everything is electrified? And I would say that given buildings use in urban settings a vast amount of energy, it really behooves us to make sure that those buildings are new passive house or retrofitted to passive house, simply because passive house buildings use such little energy that that it would lessen the load on the electrical system. So it really makes sense that unless you want to double or triple the amount of production and carrying, you need to make sure that the major users, buildings, are just sipping electricity, not gulping it down. And you want to make sure those buildings can maybe even meet their own electrical loads through solar and battery storage. So yes, we need to move to electrical, if nothing more than fossil fuels are becoming increasingly expensive and have a negative, when we burn them, have a negative effect on our climate, but they're becoming cost prohibitive. But we need to have buildings that just sip electricity, and those are passive house buildings.
Excellent.
So I'd like to add to that, in that we cannot hit the UN targets and still burn fossil fuels in our buildings. So it is a given that we have to go to electrification. There will be many paths, and reducing the demand is very important, but fuel switching is probably the number one. And if you fuel switch first and then reduce the demand, it actually, the cost isn't any different for utilities. And so I think the biggest thing we have to do as a group is come together and understand the pathways that are going to get us there, so that it's all hands on deck. We're not still putting gas into new buildings, and we're not still building envelopes that are not going to help our electricity system. So it's not, some people are kind of shocked, but we can't burn things. It's like so basic. We all think that someone else is going to come in and solve this problem and make it work. We've been trying for years, and there is no way that we can proceed without getting rid of fossil gas in our buildings.
So in our closing statement here, as the net zero and energy reporting requirements become more stringent in the GTA, keep in mind that this isn't rocket science. The design and construction of the building envelope can play a significant role in maximizing the efficiency of design. In addition to taking more care when detailing and constructing the interfaces between the materials and ensuring an airtight barrier, increasing insulation, reducing the window to wall ratio, and installing more energy efficient glazing will go a long way in reducing the energy consumption of your building. The TCA Environmental Committee is looking to the industry leaders to join us in our efforts to keep our members informed as the movement towards the net zero unfolds. In addition to encouraging each and every company to become a green ambassador and/or join the Environmental Committee, we also ask you to help us help you by participating in our upcoming TCA Environmental Survey. The more feedback we receive from our members, the more effectively we can customize our program to meet your needs. To our distinguished panel members, I thank you for this informative, invigorating discussion. And thank you to the audience for joining us. A copy of our presentation is available online, and we look forward to seeing you at our next section in the fall, when we'll be discussing the continually evolving City of Toronto Green Standards. I see we had one more question I will go to. First two questions were associated with having the products, and it's all about being available. Yes, the presentation is available. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation. We were delighted to be here, and if anyone wants to learn more about Passive House Canada, they can find it online and or come out to one of our socials in Toronto.
Excellent.